morning for Brazilian people. That here in Brazil is 11 o'clock a.m. Good afternoon to our European guests from Italy, England, Spain. I don't know if there is somebody from the United States, where I believe is still morning, but very welcome to this third international webinar of the Structuralist Development Macroeconomics Research Group, which is done together with the graduate program in political economy of the University of Brasília. We have the pleasure to have here today with us my old friend, Professor Lionello Franco Punzo from the University of Siena, and he will present a lecture about Kaldor, Goodwin, and Cambridge growth economics. I think that Professor Lionello Punzo deserves further presentation, but I think that I have a small CV of Professor Lionello Punzo here on the website of the Structuralist Development Macroeconomics Research Group. Just a moment, please. Okay. Professor Lionello Franco Punzo is full professor at the University of Siena, Department of Economics and Statistics since 1989, lecturing on the economics of cultural goods and sustainable tourists at master's levels and macroeconomics intermediate. He was associate professor and tenure track assistant professor in mathematical economics at the Instituto de Economia of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro on the fourth quarter of 2017. He has taught on public goods as drivers of development. He was also visiting professor at ENCT PPAD of Federal University of Rio de Janeiro since its creation. He is doctor in Scienze Economique, Siena, and PhD in economics at London School of Economics. A member of the Tourism Sustainability Group at ECDG Enterprise from 2007 to 2015, coordinator of the Maestria en Economía y Gestión de Turismo Sostenible, joint degree of UNIS and UDELAR, Montevideo, Uruguay. He was also coordinator of the EUCOMPEX and LabCompex networks financed by the 7th European Union Framework Programme of Science and Technology. He has taught and researched on growth and development in Europe in the Institute for Advanced Studies in Vienna in 1985, Latapesis CNRS Université de Nice in the 90s, in Japan at Shakin Institute of Socioeconomic Research at the University of Osaka, 1996, at the Center of Japanese Studies, CRGA of Tokyo University in 2001. In the United States, various times, visiting professor at UCLA, 1983, 1990, 1993, and in some Latin American countries, Uruguay since 1993 and Brazil since 2000. He was consultant for EDB, UNDP, and European Community and the Italian Cooperation of a number of projects of local sustainable development driven by tourism. Fulbright Fellow at UCLA 1983. He has published extensively on sustainable tourism, example in Annals of Tourism Research, and more recently on inequality in relation to comparative development, example in Journal of Post-Keynesian Economics, or in Review of Economic Development. Currently researching on financialization, industrialization in a comparative setting. Published the book, The Dynamics of the Capitalist Society, with Richard Goodwin, 1983, edited European Countries in Transition with O. Fable and F. Farina, and more recently, Beyond the Global Crisis with Carmen Feijó and José Anuiri. Well, so this is the bio, the CV of our guest. So without any further delays, I thanks to Lionello Punzo to have accepted our invitation to this webinar, and please, Lionello, the audience is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Luis. We are all-time friends of each other, eh? But I have to thank you for the invitation, and that made me think once again about the association with the people in Cambridge about dynamics. Unfortunately, you read the short CV that shows how old I am. It is not that short, but let me comment on the title first. I will be talking about Kaldor, Goodwin, and the Cambridge dynamic economics. How did they get into growth economics? And so I put out the title, the original title there, but I mean, the thread in my talk will be about how to get from dynamics to growth. Now, the next slide begins with the story. I have to tell a story. The story begins with Ragnar Frisch. In his paper 1933, he defined the outline of what would be a reasonable or what would be mandatory to build a dynamic theory. It is a dynamic theory. It is one theory where time enters he said, in an essential way. Essential way meant that you have to have either lags in discrete time or derivatives, time derivatives in ordinary differential equations systems. Obviously, Ragnar Frisch was looking after, had this model put out, which I'll be using, that's why I put it there. I'll be using later on to see how this model was modified along the way, mostly in Cambridge, but with some inflows from Oxford. And so the Frisch's macrodynamics, Frisch's is how do you say, credited for having created macrodynamics as a dynamics of macro aggregates, where time was treated in an essential way. In his model, he had an impulse, a black box, which is called propagation mechanism, and then from there he would have a response function. So this is a very simple structure. The black box, the requirement that Frisch wanted, I would call it the requirement, Frisch's requirement, is that all data, all impulse and black box and the response will have to be made of observable quantities, because Frisch was really after creating what today we will call econometrics. Now, in his own mind, the black box, being educated in the Wickselian tradition, he was a Norwegian. The black box was conceived as a miniature general equilibrium model, but had to be applied to an observed economy, so that the estimated data had to replace the mathematical symbols of the general equilibrium models. Now, in the interpretation of the black box or the propagation mechanism, the problem was explicitly set out for people to think about. And I reckon there will be only there were three lines of thought that developed in the interpretation of the black box beyond the general equilibrium vision or interpretation of Ragnar Frisch and of his own almost student Ian Timbergen. They both got the same Nobel Prize at the same time, in 1969. Now, the three lines. The first line, I'm trying to put some order in the development of the literature. The first one was the first line, not in time-wise, but it turns out to be useful for me to treat the first line. It was the line that they aggregated the black box of observable and discarded entirely intra-industry trades because they were treated as invisible, that is, non-observable. So this line led to Stone-Meade, or perhaps Meade and Stone, Richard Stone, structural sums metrics, and the institution framework that went with it. It was the institution framework gave a matrix interpretation of the output response function. Now the second line, now you see John Maynard Keynes. I'm forcing Keynes into looking into the black box of Ragnar Frisch. I'm not saying that he did look into it. I'm saying that how can we accommodate his thought within the framework set out by Ragnar Frisch. So what I'm observing is that in creating modern macroeconomics from the point of view of Ragnar Frisch, Keynes may have been looking inside the black box, and there he posited the Kant's multiplier. That is a linear propagation mechanism with the effective demand as or the investment as the impulse. However, Keynes did not comply with other Ragnar Frisch's requirements. He had a linear internal structure of the black box. I call it black box or inner structure equivalently. But the general theory was not dynamic in the sense of Frisch, had no time in an essential way according to the definition of Ragnar Frisch. So you had to have, to build the dynamic theory, still according to Ragnar Frisch, you had to have time to put into it and then feedback mechanism. And this was basically what Harrod did. Harrod was in Oxford. Even though he was not in Cambridge, he was very actively a Keynesian. And in my interpretation, he looked into the box, into the black box, and introduced a feedback mechanism, which is the accelerator principle, which being positive feedback, and he was a destabilizer of the economy, and the accelerator principle in discrete time would naturally bring about a time lag that is satisfying. So he was, in a sense, killing two birds with one stone, with the accelerator principle and the time lag going with the accelerator principle. He was really inventing what I call modern dynamics or macrodynamics. Now, St. John Park is on top of the picture of Sir Roy Harrod, which was eventually made Sir, and returning to the picture that previously I put forward of the Ragnar Frisch diagram, you see that on one side you had the impulse, on the other side you had the propagation mechanism, but then you had the accelerator that brought the response function, the level of output, and the variation and the level of output back into the propagation mechanism. And so Harrod's key idea was, in a sense, a reinterpretation of Keynes. The warranted path as a balanced path is fully determined by the black box or the inner structure, and there is not a single one, there are many ones depending on the savings propensity and the capital output ratio, so S over V. But the problem is that in Harrod's view, the warranted path was determined, it was a set of determined by the inner structure, but it was not observable. Here, I have to say something about personal memories, which might be of some use. You see, Harrod published one article in that he presented in the Econometrica, one of the earliest Econometrica meetings, the one who took place in Oxford at the end in September 1936, I think. And he gave, together with other people, his own understanding of the warranted path, and it was clear from his treatment that he was treating the warranted path or a balanced path of some sort as an unobservable notion. That is, he said that and this notion, you see, a virtual path, and which was one of the many virtual paths, unobservable, and likewise, there was one specific balanced path was the one which ensured full employment. This too was unobservable. So he was thinking in terms of Ragnar Frisch. He was distinguishing between observables, and he was saying that the observables are only the deviations from the warranted path or the full employment path. That was, I think, his understanding of the situation. And in this sense, he was reinterpreting Keynes. Now, something happened, which I found confirmation in reading the life of Ian Tinbergen. Ian Tinbergen, as a result of participating in the Econometrica meeting in Oxford, where Harrod presented his views, produced in German, in a very forgotten German journal, a piece where he said he observed that cycle behavior can only arise with if you have a structure, special lags, or at least you have a higher order lag. And he made a point that Harrod's lagged description of the warranted path could not yield a cycle. So he reinterpreted Harrod's idea in the sense that he thought that the warranted path was an observable. Now, somebody called my attention to this German published review, elementary mathematics, of a review of elementary mathematics, and as a motivation for him changing his mind at the end of the 30s in the trade cycle, the book, Harrod seems to have changed his mind. He's treating the warranted path as a balanced path that could be observed, and likewise the full employment balanced path could be observed too. So he changed a theory of virtual warranted path into that went along with the theory of deviations, that is explosive deviations, we all know, as he changed his mind into a theory of the growth, a theory of growth for both the warranted path and the full employment balance path. But unfortunately, in between 36 and 39, when the trade cycle came out, Harrod had introduced some important new ideas. First idea was that the economic system could have been considered in isolation, as if it were a closed system. Remember, Ragnar Frisch's system is an open system, and I have reinterpreted Keynes as an open system. Now, this does not imply that the economic system is a closed system. It only implies the intellectual exercise of seeing what would look like if it were a closed system. Now, as a closed system, or considering the economic system in isolation from the environment, he had, according to Harrod, properties typical of mathematically nonlinear systems. First of all, multiple equilibrium paths that all were unobservable paths. And the full employment path would be one of the generally many non-observable equilibrium paths. These are the three ideas that I find in the Econometrica contribution, 1936. Now, this set out a whole generation to a problem, looking into the black box as if it were a closed nonlinear system brought out lots more issues that were preoccupying this whole generation, we'll see later. But the first question was that of what would look like an observable path if it were not a warranted path. Now remember, the warranted path has been producing an enormous literature, the warranted path, an enormous literature on the so-called knife-edge stability properties of the warranted path, which has virtually nothing to do, in my interpretation, with Harrod's own interpretation. But now we hear with the question that was raised by the treatment of Harrod. What would look like an observable path? Of course, it had to be a deviation from a warranted path. And now the general observation, okay, is that undriven, natural, or not man-made systems, closed systems, normally do oscillate. Seldom if they are not man-made, do they grow steadily? So steady growth or balanced growth. Is balanced growth even more than steady growth? Is the limit case that hardly can be observed? This was, I think, the message by Harrod. While they oscillate, this closed system, they do so with self-sustained oscillation. That is, oscillations that once started, they keep going on. They are persistent oscillations once initialized. Sometimes these oscillations can be complicated by further exogenous inputs, can be give erraticity of this oscillation could be a result of exogenous inputs. This is an idea, you see, looking inside the black box by Harrod brought a generation after Harrod to abandoning the notion of the economy as an open system and to concentrate on the properties of the closed version of the economic system as if it were in isolation. It is this, the third line I'm talking about. The first one is the made stone, to which I will come back later on. The second one is Keynes to Harrod, but basically Harrod. The third one is after Harrod. Now, self-sustained endogenous oscillation was considered to be a mode of growth of the capitalist society, a typically Schumpeterian idea, which came to Kaleski, to Kaldor of the business cycle, to Hicks, to Samuelson, and I must say to Frisch, according to my reading of Frisch, and eventually to Goodwin. It became the intellectual project of the whole generation. Now I listed some of these people. On the far left, you have Kaleski, Kaldor, Hicks, and Samuelson, and Frisch, and Richard Goodwin. Let me go on. And so this, there was a dramatic change of view here because Ragnar Frisch, playing with an open system, was thinking of a general equilibrium miniature model, very much in a sense in the like of the computable general equilibrium systems of the more recent days. He was thinking of equilibrium as an isolated state where general equilibrium equations could be made consistent. We know that that is not so simple, and the literature after Mr. Frisch for a long time has been dwelling on this issue, leading to Debreu, to Harrod, lots of other people. So this generation thought that whatever was not an isolated equilibrium state had to be a disequilibrium. So they thought that the limit cycles they were trying to build as the model of the persistent self-sustained oscillation had to be, the limit cycles had to represent this equilibrium behavior, which of course was wrong. It was wrong, and the mathematics proved to be wrong. So the limit cycle, at one point, some of these people tried to go beyond the limit cycle. the limit cycle of Poincaré tradition that everybody had copied, they tried to look for a one-sided cycle that was using the notion of full employment equilibrium ceiling as the ceiling that perpetuates perpetuates oscillation. Unfortunately, am I going too slow? José Luis, am I too slow?
No, you still have 25 minutes. So
okay.
you
Unfortunately, okay. Unfortunately, the whole generation, which I mentioned before, malinterpreted Harrod's multiple equilibria path. They thought that Harrod was trying to conjugate the trend balanced path with the deviations, the observed typically oscillatory behavior. So there was a basically misunderstanding, I think, that one can read in the literature beginning 1950s. And, but of course, there was the misunderstanding was deep, you know, balance growth and business cycles or trade cycle, as they used to be called at the time, are distinct dynamical modes or motions. First of all, they have totally different time spans. They now, with the knowledge that we have of post-Poincaré mathematics, now we know that the issue was that the appropriate dimensional space was too low. And so in the attempt desperate to conjugate, to resolve the misunderstanding and conjugate cycle with trend, the intellectual program of that generation proved to be a failure. They could not conjugate the two motions. But this was, they could get only one of them and not the other one. But this was the problem inherited of Harrod. It was not the problem at issue. So the problem really was a distinct one. Was the limit cycle, that is the model of a self-sustained oscillation they were building, was it really representing this equilibrium for real, or was it not? Now, before this evident failure, at the early 1950s, and I know of this failure because some people like Michio Morishima, who lived far away, could not, in Japan, could not participate in the feelings of failure of a whole generation. Michio published in 1957 a limit cycle paper in Zeitschrift, long when the time was wrong. When in 1957 you already had Solow, Swan, and you already had the new Kaldor. Now, new Kaldor, I call it new because I agree that the Kaldor changed his mind many times in his life. I do not totally agree with Silva, but I agree with José Luis and these people. So out of the failure, I should have written failure in italics, out of the failure, beginning 1950s, there were only two solutions. Either to revert to the open model originally set out by the Ragnar Frisch, or accepting the notion that the trend is a pure statistical construction. Now, at the present, we know that the latter notion has been used by real business cycle people. They have renovated this idea. But at the time we're talking about, which is the opening up of the growth model, the appearance of the growth models, of all sorts of growth models. The first one, reverting to the open model, was the one to win. These that you see in the open model, now you understand Solo and Swan as open system models, where you have a driver which is called exogenous technological progress. So the result of returning to the linear model was such that a growth theory was invented, which was independent of the theory of the trade cycle. The long run implied an exogenously driven trend. Now, I think it was a cultural shock. Solo saw the possibilities. And in a paper that I wrote for the 50th anniversary of the invention of the exogenous or the neoclassical growth model, I was asking one question. How come Solo in Boston and Swan in Australia came up with the same solution? We have to ask these questions. And my answer was that the question was there. Solo and Swan gave the answer. The question was there because it was left there by the previous generation as the unsolved Harrodian conjugation principle. So either you had to go for the trade cycle or you had to go for growth. Solo and Swan to growth. What was the cultural shock was that Solo, by the way, with the tiny modifications, small modifications within the black box, proved, and that is the important in Solo and Swan, proved the global stability of Harrod's of a Harrodian full employment equilibrium path. This was attained by introducing a very simple production function, the simplest constant returns to scale production function inside the black box. The answer to this cultural shock, I insist it was a cultural shock, the global stability. The shock was not the existence of such a full employment path. It was the global stability of it. These took people like Kaldor unexpectedly. Kaldor's answer, I don't remember the name, was a re-examination of income distribution. But both Kaldor and Solo Swan, they all remained open system theories. At the same time, why am I wasting so much time on this technical detail? It is because at the same time that you had to abandon a program, an intellectual project, you had what basically was a linear impulse response mechanism that could be complicated the way you like it by putting into the black box whatever you like it. Kaldor, Solo, Swan, they complicated the black box. But the story is that in any case, the theory lies outside, lies in the impulse. At the same time, what is interesting is that econometrics of the business cycle was born as a separate, linear, purely stochastic theory with the business cycle or trade cycle reinterpreted as erratic deviations from the trend, either Kaldor or Solo trend. Now you see what happened in the middle of the 50s is exactly this. You see that the real, now you have on the left-hand side, you have on top the growth theory, at the bottom the erratic shocks that we'll see. And at one point somebody said, you know, if you place the explanation outside the theory, you don't have a theory. And that's what I'm saying. The explanation of growth lies in technical progress, and the explanation of business cycle in erratic shocks. And you can have as complicated as you want structure. It can be linear, can be non-linear. In any case, the drivers or the dynamics are lying outside. And we live in this. We don't live anymore in this life, in this view, because technological progress led to exogenous growth theory, and erratic shocks led to irregular business cycles as defined before. So you see, basically, the two things went together. That's why the two models were similar. You see, Robert Solo on the right-hand side is not far away from Eugene Slutsky on the left-hand side. Eugene Slutsky is better known for other things, but at the time we are talking about, he was best known for his idea that the erratic shocks would have an erratic response by the system. Now, Kaldor, 1957, had a desperate trick, his investment function, that they plugged back the output function into the technical progress. This was the opening gate of endogenous growth theory. And it deserves to be recognized as such. Now, at one point I happened to say in another speech, you know, we used to live after the 50s with the exogenous growth theory and exogenous business cycle theory, and we now live in a situation where growth theory has become and is called endogenous, and the real business cycle is, in a sense, endogenous too. This is something, the times have changed, but I think this is something we have to reflect about. Now, I want to come back to what I call the first line. And somebody else was looking, remember, with Luis Oreiro discussed this. Somebody else was really looking into the black box of the economy, and this was Richard Stone. And he thought that the sum tables could be complementary to the input-output tables, because the input-output tables do what the sum tables normally don't do. They look at trades intra-industry. This is of course, Richard Stone, the creator of the Department of Applied Economics of Cambridge, and I think the creator of the Cambridge tradition, where you have structure and structural changes are at the center of the thought in Cambridge now. Now, the creator of the notion of structure is, we all know, is Wassily Leontief. He has many relations with lots of other people we would be talking about, made the notion of structure enter, and Stone recognized the importance of the input-output tables to complete his representation of an economy. Now, this leads us to the old problem. How do we marry linear with nonlinear dynamics? Now, in a sense, the reasons for the failure of the generation project, intellectual project, was that they could not marry linear with nonlinear dynamics. That is why they could not marry linear with the nonlinear dynamics of Harrod. This is still an unanswered question, but it is there. If Luis gives me 2 more minutes, I say something about this.
Yes, Lionello, we still have 80 minutes.
What, how many?
80.
80?
Yes.
8.
That's not possible. 18. Okay. So, you see, Cambridge, I think it is in Cambridge that the linear structures of input-output really took foot. And in fact, the only journal that structural change economic dynamics is a Cambridge journal. This title does not exist elsewhere. It is appropriately so. What was the problem? What was the structure, the linear structure in Leontief? That was the case for many debates. I insist that the structure as a representation of the intra-industry trades or invisible trades, according to Ragnar Frisch, was considered by Leontief and many others who worked on it with him as an approximation to reality. under determined approximation. So if we accept the linear multidimensional representation are approximation, then it is easy to marry it with nonlinear dynamics. That is my answer to this question. I'll finish here. Okay.
Okay, Lionello, many thanks for this wonderful presentation that encompassed much of the history of heterodox economic thought from a Cambridge tradition. And I think that your presentation should deserve a paper if you want to write it. And I think that would be very interesting for the community of heterodox economists. I, as moderator, I just make two short questions or issues. It's not exactly a question, but 2 remarks to be more precise. I think that in your presentation you had talked about 2 different issues from my point of view. The first one is the problem of integration with trend and business cycles. This problem of the integration of trend with business cycles was posed for the first time, I believe, in an article published by Luigi Pasinetti, maybe in the beginning of the 70s or end of the 60s. Basically, what Pasinetti did was to show that in a model that combines the accelerator investment function with the Keynesian multiplier, the solution of the model can be either balanced growth or a business cycle, but cannot be both. So Pasinetti, in this article, makes a strong affirmation, a strong position about the impossibility of having in the same model trend and cycle. You may have a model of business cycles with the interaction of multiplier and accelerator, and the trend is exogenous, or you can use the accelerator multiplier model to explain the trend, but you cannot have both. Well, this position has a clear empirical problem. The empirical problem is that in the beginning of the 80s, with the workings of time series, it was discovered by most empirical economists that the time series of gross domestic product is non-stationary. If the time series is non-stationary, then any temporary shock, either if it was a demand shock or if it was a supply shock, will have a permanent effect over the level of output. So the separability between trend and cycle is posed in question with the work, well, with the seminal work of Plosser, which is a real business cycle economist. But the fact is that it's not possible in econometric terms to just separate trend and cycle. Any temporary shock, either from the demand side or from supply side of the economy, had permanent effects over the level, maybe not over the rate of change, but over the level of real output. That's my first remark. The second remark is that in the last 15 to 20 years, in the heterodox growth theory, we had made some steps backward, a view that is
very popular in the 50s, that is based on the idea that we have to construct balanced growth models. The heterodox theories on the 60s try to overcome the limitations of balanced growth models, incorporating dynamics. I think that Hicks is one of the economists that make large efforts on trying to overcome the limitations of balanced growth models. But the fact that mainly due to the work of Marc Lavoie, we had a clear step back to the vision that economists, even heterodox economists, had to construct balanced growth models. Why I'm saying this is a step backward? Because all the post-Keynesian discussion in the 80s, see, for instance, the Kregel's article on the Economic Journal about the modeling methods of Keynes and post-Keynesians, was precisely to develop models where there is path dependence and hysteresis. So, which is absolutely incompatible with the idea of balanced growth. But because of the simplicity, mathematical simplicity of balanced growth models, and because it's an important question, because the neo-Calexian models, mainly developed after the seminal paper of Rauter in 1981, neo-Calexian growth models are basically balanced growth models, even though some people like the neo-Ricardians say that these are not long-run models because in the long run you must have gravitation of capacity utilization to the normal levels, but they're essentially balanced growth models. And now we have the recent controversy on the the Zraffian supermultiplier. But there is nothing Zraffian on the supermultiplier. It's basically an idea that was developed by before by Hicks and Harrod. But the idea of the supermultiplier is to try to rescue the neo-Calexian growth models from the devastating criticism at theoretical and empirical level made by Peter Scott in 2010 and 2012. 2010 was a chapter in the book published by Mark Satterfield, and in 2012 I think there is a working paper on the UMass. But Peter Scott argues very consistently that the neo-Calexian models simply misrepresent the properties of a capitalist economy, and mainly because they assume a very low propensity to invest. And if you assume, as it was plausible, high propensity to invest, then you come back to instability problem of Harrod's growth model, and then simply the neo-Calexian growth models explode. So there is no salvation, no possible salvation for the neo-Calexian growth models. Well, the Zraffian supermultiplier is an attempt, for my point of view and of Peter Scott. We sent recently a paper to Macroeconomics together with Júlio Fernando, that we argue that the rescue operation of the neo-Calexian growth models made by the Zraffian supermultiplier simply failed. So I think that the question of the return to a balanced growth model is an impoverishment of the heterodox tradition, because you just taking away all the relevance of the productive structure and structural change from the economic thought. And structural change was the basic idea of both the classical development theory and late American structuralism. For example, the works of Raul Prebisch and also of Celso Furtado. So mainly Lewis, for instance, his article, his seminal paper on 54, sorry, Lewis writes, I'm not worried about stable saving ratios. My question is to explain how a country that saves 4 to 5% of its GDP managed to increase its saving rate to, for instance, saving and investment rate to 15 to 20% of GDP. So, so clearly, Lewis are talking that I'm not worried with balanced growth. What matters for economic development is precisely unbalanced growth, because development is necessarily unbalanced because it involves a structural change. So if you try to use a balanced growth model to explain economic development, you simply will not explain anything else, because development is, for definition, change, and change is by definition unbalanced. Well, that's my comments, my brief comments to Lionello, and then I will now open for questions from the audience. Please raise your hands in the Zoom. I think that Professor Luis Carlos Bressa Pereira, now you don't want to make any question. Well, we are open to questions from the audience. Please do not be shy. Marvio, Vitor, Ricardo Araújo. King, yes, King, please. You can ask your question.
Yes, thank you for that, opportunity. So yeah, I just have a quick clarification question. So, so you mentioned about this open system and closed systems. So perhaps you already defined it clearly, but I just was wondering that what's the really distinguishable feature between these open and closed systems in your context. And also, I think you said in your interpretation of the Harrod, the balanced paths are unobservable, and there are multiple ones. And I was wondering that then in Harrod, or maybe in your perspective, what determines that multiple unobservable balanced paths? What are the determinants of them that we can think of? So those are my two clarifying questions.
Okay, thanks, Kim. Any more questions for Professor Punzo from the audience? Nobody? So, Lionello, please, you can answer the questions and my comments.
Thank you. Pasinetti's article 1970 something, it's an old article, not only because it is 1970s, but because what he says there, he's a friend, of course, but I like him a lot. But I mean, what he says there, people said in 1951 or 52. So it's nothing new to me. Of course, you know, if you have a low-dimensional equation, you get either one or the other one. I said that, no? I said that not because Pasinetti said that in 1970s, but because people said that in 1951. You know, it is the story that you cannot conjugate the trend with any trend with the cycle, with the trade cycle. That's what Pasinetti is saying in that paper. I know the paper. Now, the other story is about Plösser. I think people in the real business cycle theory went a long way towards resolving what I call the failure problem. And one story is the persistence of shocks. But the persistence, I must say, the persistence of shocks is something you find in the paper 1944. So, okay, Ploster found it out, found it again. Wonderful, good. I'm happy. Now, this shows the economists always talk about the same stories, and they discover periodically the same stories. Now, unbalanced. Of course, I do agree that unbalanced has nothing to do with development. Balanced has nothing to do with development. And that there are unbalanced models I'm not aware very much of. I mean, I think, it was, mine was a kind of a logical reconstruction of how a problem was framed, became to be framed and handed over to a new generation. Not everybody was new, Solo was young, but Kaldor had belonged to the older generation. Now, Kim story open and closed, I mean, it's very simple. Apart from being a definition which is in the literature, in system theory literature, open is any system which is driven, whose dynamics is driven, or, even limit cycle systems with limit cycles need to be excited. But once excited, I said initialized before. Once initialized, they do whatever they want to do. That is the self-sustained oscillation. That's the difference between initialized and between open and closed system. An open system, let me repeat, is a system whose dynamics can be totally understood as a modification or propagation or amplification of whatever dynamics is applied to it, which is the impulse function. Now, there was another question by Kim. Sorry, I didn't have time to. Kim, can you repeat the second question, please?
Yeah, sure. So my second question is about, you said there are multiple unobservable balanced paths in your interpretation of Harrod.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering that, so there are multiple ones. So what seems to be the determinant?
One for every for every savings propensity, for every output capital ratio. So there are many. So the warranted part is not unique. It is entirely determined by whatever lies in the black box as saving propensity and B, output capital ratio. So there are many. One of them, one balanced growth path, the warranted path is a balanced growth path, but there may be balanced growth paths which are not warranted, like the full employment path, need not be a warranted path, but it is a balanced path.
Okay, so there is no separate, or there are no other like more sort of like fundamental factors that we can think of as those unobservable multiple balance.
I mean, I think it is clear in reading Harrod 1936 that he separates out those which are observable from those which are not observable. He says the non-observables are so delicate that any kick will initiate a dynamics which is totally different from that one. Okay, that
Okay.
is that I call them deviations. Okay, is that
Great.
all right, Kim? Did I answer you?
Yes, thank you.
I used the macrodynamics framework as a way of explaining what happened in the 30s, because you see in the 30s happened three things which are totally different. One was the invention of econometrics and the story that I said. And then the other one is the stochastic revolution, the stochastic information institute revolution. And the third one is the birth of modern general equilibrium theory. This is the story of the 30s. Any more?
Okay, people, more questions to Lionello Punzo? No one? Well, Professor Lionello Punzo, in behalf of the Structuralist Development Macroeconomics Research Group and of the graduate program in political economy of the University of Brasília, we thanks to this wonderful presentation. Personally, I would like to see a paper written by this subject because it is very interesting. But many thanks to have your participation in this webinar. And thanks for the audience for having stayed with us until this time. Now in Brazil is lunchtime, so we have to go to lunch. But Lionello, once more, many thanks for your presentation, and I declare it closed this webinar. Good afternoon for you all. Thanks. Bye, Lionello.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.